hailed as being a fantastic thing. It's going to be wonderful. You know, we're going to be able to grow crops in drought situations, awkward situations, and absolute necessity for us to feed the world. Well, most of you here, as I say, more knowledgeable than me in terms of socialism and everything else, will know that that's an absolute myth. The reason, of course, that the GM is being so heavily pushed is because there are huge profits to be made on seed patents. And the poor farmers, and they are poor, they live in these various backwaters of the world, if you like, will be forced to grow these seeds and will only be able to buy those seeds. And of course, they can't then collect the seeds from the plant afterwards and carry on growing it. Finished. They have to buy more. They are forced to buy more. And this is, in my view, absolutely criminal. But I'm afraid that's what goes on. And Monsanto and people like that, I'll talk about them later, are probably a prime example of those sorts of companies. Massive, massive companies that put people second, and therefore the environment. That's not just talking about the environment, incidentally, when I'm talking about GM crops. There is the other damage to the environment is a monoculture. When you've got a GM crop, or any monoculture, I work with trees, and I'll come to that later, that's my job. I run a small arboricultural company. You've probably seen people swinging about on ropes in trees, that's what I do. The fact is, I know, and years ago in the 1930s, they had the street beautification scheme. And you probably know, if you've driven through the suburbs of London, you've seen umpteen streets with loads of pink sort of candy floss trees all down the sides. Those trees are called Prunus kansang. And when you've got so many of one tree, if you get a disease that hits that tree, it hits the lot, you know, and they all go. So there is a price to be paid for this monoculture. And there was something on the news the other day, forgive me, I can't remember when, but it was basically, there was a lady scientist arguing against GM crops and saying that it's way more successful when you have a diversity of crops. And in fact, they are more successful in dealing with all the various problems that ensue when you have a warming temperature and so on. So it's a myth, is what I'm suggesting to you. Now, the problem that I have as well is when one tries to put the cause for socialism, and I think in a way the problem is demonstrated by the fact that we've got some people here that are obviously very dedicated to the cause, and look out of the window, there are hundreds of people walking by just as we're talking now, so what is it that is the problem? And I think it's rather like religion. When I talk to people, and I have done many, many times, some friends of mine, I have their various religious convictions. When you talk to them, their bottom line is, their end answer is, oh, you must have faith. That is the final answer they have. They have not got anything beyond that. That is where you stop with the argument when you talk about religion with people. I have to say, I have a lot of sympathies in a lot of areas of different religions, be it Buddhism, Jehovah's Witnesses, or Church of England, whoever it is. I think an awful lot of them do good things, and in a way you could argue they're proving that humanity isn't innately unpleasant. They do good things. Where I fail to work our company is where they get to the end and they say, oh, you've got to have faith because you've got to believe in this God or whatever it happens to be. I think socialists have the same sort of problem, because where they meet up with a similar sort of argument, it's not quite faith. It's an argument where these people, less than that here, are walking by having a great time in the sun, they genuinely believe, and I don't want to sound patronising, I'm not being patronising, I wish they'd come in and we could convince them otherwise, but I do believe that they genuinely believe that there is no other way. You know, this is how it is and how it's always got to be. And that also I struggle with, because I think we come to the point in society now where the problems of society are becoming so obvious to people that they're all struggling with how they can deal with it, and they're trying to deal with these problems within this system. And therein lies the problem. People, ideally, I think, should be able to view a system, a new way of living. After all, there have been others. It's not as if this has been the only one. You know, we've had hunter-gatherers, we've had feudalism, we've had sort of, if you like, a sort of mini form of capitalism. Now we've got globalization. What after that? There has to be something else from it. Often I talk to people and this sort of thing comes out. Yesterday I was invited to a lunch to present an environmental prize in Kent. And it's the usual sort of gothic people who turned up there, but I was next to a lady who's worked Kent County Council, and her job was to deal with policies on food security. And I couldn't quite figure out in Kent what that meant, but in essence, Kent grows an awful lot of strawberries, an awful lot of potatoes, but she's quite puzzled because she couldn't understand why we're bringing so much food and veg in from elsewhere in the world. And she's telling me that it's terrible because, you know, there's these ancient aquifers in part of Africa where they are now, to make more profit, draining these aquifers. They're sucking this water out of these ancient aquifers that will never be replaced. It will, once it's out, it's finished and gone. And they're putting the water effectively into the crops and then shipping them over here. And I said, well, why do they do it? She said, well, it just makes more profit. And there you are, there's someone who's not a socialist who's giving you the answer but not quite making the link. And I find that with a lot of people, they almost give you the answer. When you tease it out, they give you the answer. They say, well, it's just because profit's put first. And then you struggle, because then if you then try and suggest a socialist case, then they go all blank and they can't quite get their heads around it. I also spoke recently to a young woman who I was rock climbing with. She's part of a group, and she's about 23. And I don't know how we got onto the subject. It wasn't how you might think I got on the subject, but we were talking about babies. And she said, I'm definitely not having children. I just think the world's too dangerous. And this is a 23-year-old woman. And personally, I think that's you know, quite a disturbing way of looking at things. And it's worrying, I think, that young people now are beginning to almost accept this a terrible situation, but feel impotent against it. The Prince's Trust did some studies last year, and it was found that something like 25% of young people feel clinically or are clinically depressed, and something like 10% feel like there's no point in living anymore. Now, I don't know how you feel about this. I think these are dreadful statistics. I won't go into too many statistics because I think, well, I haven't got them in my head, that's why. Now, the other thing when one is dealing with people who believe in this current society, if you like, is this idea that we are somehow to blame. And this word bothers me. It's used an awful lot in articles, or when people are talking about problems. They're saying, well, we take too much, we do this wrong, we do that wrong. And they constantly fail to realise that it's nothing to do with individual people. It's the arrangement of our society. It's not we as individuals, but it's extremely useful tool for politicians to use. Because if they can get people to believe that, you know, we are greedy, we have got to cut down more. And after all, let's face it, we're often referred to as ordinary people. We're often referred to as consumers, and that's something that really bugs me. But it's almost an insult to call someone a consumer, if they're sort of like some huge machine that is sucking in the goodness of the world and it can't be stopped. Right, I'm waffling on quite a lot, so I'd like to get on to some pictures. But before I do, actually, I'm just going to read you briefly. Jacqueline kindly gave me this. It's a very thoughtful lady, and she sort of picked this up. Now, this is a Socialist Standard from June 1975, and this actually sort of says a lot of things I wanted to say. So I think time will allow me just to read a bit of this to you. Now, this is over a quarter of a century ago, and I think those of you here that aren't socialists will begin to understand that socialism as a cause is not one that moulds itself to current thinking. It's a cause that has existed unchanged for many, many years. And also the problems that it addresses and refers to have also existed at that time. Anyway, a continual obstacle to socialism has always been the alleged urgency of things which people say must be seen to first.